Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session, Writing Lives. My name is Abhishek Choudhary, and I was supposed to be in conversation with Narayani Basu, who is right across, and Sanjeev Chopra, but unfortunately, due to some emergency, Mr. Chopra could not make it. And so, instead of a conversation about Mr. Panikkar and Mr. Lal Bahadur Shastri, um, it will be a conversation about Panikkar and Vajpayee. But I hope it's going to be fun and illuminating. Okay, so let's dive in. Narayani, you spent the last decade researching lives. You began with VP Menon, then you wrote Allegiance on the Red Fort trials, and then you came to Panikkar. And if I'm not wrong, you already have a draft of TN Session 2. So tell me, I want to begin with how exactly do you choose your subjects?
First of all, thank you for this very kind introduction, and thank you, Abhishek. This is going to be fun. I always look forward to being on stage with Abhishek. He's a fantastic conversationalist and storyteller, as any of you who picked up the biographies of Vajpayee will know. How do I choose my subjects? Honestly, I started with my first biography, which was on VP Menon, which, full disclosure, my great-grandfather. And that I began out of a mix of both personal and archival interest.
Right.
Personal because obviously I did want to know more about my great-grandfather, but I
Right.
also, archivally because I'm trained as a historian, I wanted to know more about who this man was. I
Yeah.
only knew him from a very brief a Google bio, which is that he was Secretary of the Ministry of State under Sardar Patel, and he was incredibly instrumental as the Sardar Patel's right-hand man in bringing 565 princely states together. But I didn't know anything further about him, which might sound bizarre, but our family really doesn't speak about VP Menon in a sort of eulogical way. So it was a journey from scratch, honestly. I had to sort of dig through everything and dig through archives to sort of uncover a bureaucrat who had lapsed into oblivion. While I was doing that, I came across K.M. Panikkar. And at that point in my life, I was also working as a foreign policy analyst. And I was specializing in Chinese foreign policy at the time. And I came across K.M. Panikkar's writings on China when he was posted there as our ambassador. When I was researching VP Menon at a later stage, I came across Panikkar in a very different light when he was secretary to the Chamber of Princes in the 1930s, where he was a very ardent advocate for federalism. And I was very intrigued at that point, when you're and you know this,
Right.
when you stumble across a rabbit hole, you sort of fall down into it because there's so much more to be uncovered about people and about moments in time. And my main curiosity was, how did somebody who was in the Chamber of Princes, this guy who seems to have worked primarily with princely states, how did he become the ambassador of China?
Right.
How did he sort of hopscotch across his career? So that is how Panikkar was born, because I was just, I suppose, essentially just buried in a rabbit hole, several rabbit holes actually. And from there came this huge book on K.M. Panikkar. And I think for you also, I'm sure something must have drawn you to studying Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was a giant in his own right.
Right. I mean, actually, after the first volume came out, I was asked this question very often, and I used to give a very linear, very neat, a slightly PR kind of answer about how brave I was to approach the subject. But the truth is, at that point, it was just one of the many options. I was a struggling writer in my 20s, wanting to write a big debut. And I was originally thinking of doing a travel book, something on ancient Melas, traveling across the country. A bit like what Saman Subramaniam did with Following Fish, a brilliant book, which is. But I think I was wild, and I actually had started on that book too. So, people always assume that I've been researching right wing forever. That's not true. What happened was, in 2015, I actually started going to the archives, Teen Murti first. And then in the very first week, I discovered a few startling things. I discovered about the death of both his parents from cancer in 55. I also discovered that he was very active. He was one of the key people helping the RSS after the government banned it in February 1948. Uh, and when I was in Lucknow, I discovered some of his early writings in Rashtra Dharma, which is the first magazine he edited at. He was barely 23. So suddenly there was a lot of material, and nowhere else. I mean, certainly none of the biographies didn't have it. In fact, at that point, there weren't any biographies, proper biographies. The ones which a few came out later, but they were mostly either, I think, sort of either quickies or something like hagiographies on some occasions. So yeah, it was his early life primarily. I spent a lot of time in the archives, and I thought even if I'm not able to be able to get a lot of material about his later life, the primary material on his early life was quite dope because every day I was discovering something new, and I thought if I kept slogging on it for a few years, I will hopefully manage to say something new, something of value. Yeah. Um, okay, coming back to Panikkar now, it's a fat book. Those of you who have seen it, but so tell me, was it always supposed to be a slightly bulky book, or did the material present itself in a way that fattened it up?
I'm not a fan. I never was a fan of writing books that are murder weapons, essentially. So I really was trying not to do that.
Okay.
But the trouble is with Panikkar, his life was so vast. This
Right.
was a man, just to sort of set the scene for people who might not know who Panikkar was, he was a bit of everything, honestly, which is why the book is called A Man for All Seasons. He was a diplomat, he was a lawyer, he was a history professor in Aligarh Muslim University. He was a constitutional expert. He worked with three princely states, with Kashmir, Patiala, and Bikaner. He was our ambassador in China. He was also our man in Egypt and in France. He was a member of the States Reorganization Commission. He was also a very prolific writer of Malayalam fiction. He was also a poet. How do you condense this into something that is readable and accessible was always my struggle, because honestly, as his biographer, it was exhausting, because this was a man who he wouldn't sit down, he wouldn't stop writing, he wouldn't stop thinking. And through his life, he picks up his pen at the age of 17 when he's a university student in Oxford. And he continues writing till he dies in 1963, practically, right?
Right.
That's a swathe of not just colonial India, but
Right.
also post-colonial India.
Apparently, Akshay Mukul once told me that Panikkar was the most frequent contributor to Modern Review at some point.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Absolutely, I can believe it, because this was somebody who had opinions, right, and they were very articulate, erudite opinions. When he was in his teens, they were also very angry opinions, because the world was at war and the national movement here was gathering steam. So he was essentially also a very angry young man at that point. But this was somebody who his career covered so much of a world that was changing, an India that was changing, that I really never set out to write this book. And it's I would say about 700 pages. I didn't set out to write a book that would become as big as that, but this man was as big as that.
Yeah.
And I mean, yours was split into 2 volumes, right? Which is, it's coming ahead of me, I think, about 900 pages, 1,000.
No, my story is slightly different. When I first wrote the proposal, I was very sincere. It was a very good and very rigorous proposal. But there was a part of me that was bluffing. Or maybe bluffing is not the right word. Let's say I was flying blind. Because
we all flying blind.
Yeah, no, I had never written a book. No one in my whole khandan had ever written a book. So I had no clue how to go about it. And I think in some ways, the serious thinking about the book started when I won the NIF fellowship. And then I think it brought a little bit of financial and intellectual stability and mentors in the form of Ram Guha and Srinath and Nirja. And then they said, okay, I had pitched that it will be a book of 250 pages. And so they were like, okay, no one is going to do archival work, so why don't you they encouraged me to make it slightly, more rigorous, more bulkier. But well, I took the encouragement a bit too seriously. And what happened was, the family was not helping me at all, Mr. Vajpayee's family. So after a point, I gave up. And at the same time, I was traveling everywhere. I traveled to literally many dozens of places in India, in the US. I couldn't go to the UK because of pandemic, but I could access the online archives. I used a lot of Hindi material. Hindi material in some ways is the crux of my book, in some ways, the USP of at least the first volume. So in the end, it became I always say that I'm not a biographer, and that slightly, in some ways, it somehow misrepresents the book I wrote. But because it turned out to be, it was no longer subtitled A Life of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. It became Vajpayee and Hindu, right? It was equal part, both of him. And when I started writing about Hindu, right, the scope also broadened. Then I found myself writing about things I never imagined I would write. I wrote about SRC in great details. The states, the Reorganization Commission, Vajpayee's opposition to it. And in fact, when his mother died, he was on the road protesting against the SRC. He was 33 or something. So yeah, all of this was fascinating detail, but not the kind of detail I knew when I was writing the proposal. And so the book I ended up writing was a very different book from the one I proposed. And the first draft, it became almost 3.25 lakh words. Now, Ram was, initially he had warned me that, no, I won't let you write more than 500 pages. But he was also the first reader every time, and he kept reading, and then he was like, okay, we'll see what to do about it at some point. And he never said that, okay, we need to drastically bring it down. And at some point, when I met Shruti in 21, then Shruti read the chapters, the first few chapters, and then said, okay, I think we can split it. And I was really very broke. So like most journalists and writers, I was very, very broke. And I said, okay, if it means more money, well, why not?
Yeah.
So yeah, we broke.
I have a thought here, because you just mentioned Mr. Vajpayee's family wasn't very open to you doing this, because something that's always been a struggle for me, especially when I wrote VP Menon, which was the complete opposite case with K.M. Panikkar. With VP Menon, also the family was not very open about certain parts of his personal life. So that sort of created this dilemma about how do I write a life where the family itself is not open about certain very crucial details about certain gnarly aspects about somebody's private life, because that is something that you want to ultimately assess fully in a biography.
Yeah. Anyways, I'll come to private life a little later. Coming back to Panikkar, Narayani, good histories and biographies teach us that so much of what we take for granted was actually built with a lot of blood and sweat. And I found it fascinating while reading your book that Hindustan Times, which is one of India's most premier newspapers, was launched with a paltry sum of 25,000 rupees. And Panikkar was the founding editor. So tell us something about his brief stint as the HT's founding editor.
So this is now in the early 1920s. It's 1924 to be exact. Gandhi has just been released from jail. He's looking for a cause to support, to put the Congress support behind. He chooses the Akali trouble that is happening in Amritsar, which was basically the fact that Gurdwaras at the time were being controlled by incredibly corrupt priests. And the whole of Punjab practically was riven with strife over this, about how to wrest the Gurdwaras out of the control of these priests. And there was the British government involved. There were also local Sikhs involved. There was a huge problem at that point. Gandhi wanted somebody who would represent the Congress to try and sort of figure out a kind of deal which would bring Congress support to a region where it didn't already have popular political roots. The choice of Panikkar seems a little surprising for this, because this is a Malayali man. He doesn't know how to speak Hindi or Punjabi, and he's being sent to Amritsar. But Panikkar was a very ambitious man. By the 1920s, he'd just come out of an assignment in Aligarh Muslim University. He tried his hand at journalism. Nothing seemed to be going his way. He wanted a political career. This seemed to be one of the ways in which he could make that happen. If he could prove to Gandhi that he was good at his work, then maybe he could get somewhere. So to cut a very long story short, Panikkar goes to Amritsar. He's posted there as the head of the Akali Sahayak Bureau, which is essentially to do PR, in a sense, for the Congress. He's also by now, and this is the first time he comes into contact with Jawaharlal Nehru, who is then the General Secretary of the Congress. And it's obviously it's contact that will last throughout their public lives. At this point, Nehru has heard of Panikkar. He has read Panikkar, because Panikkar's, like I said, already been writing for a while now. And he's already beginning to put out various influential tracts on history and politics. So Nehru's heard enough about Panikkar to say, okay, this seems to be a man of substance. Let's see what he can do in Amritsar. And if he does work that is good, then he can sort of become a spokesperson for the Congress.
Right.
Um, when he is finally successfully concluding the problems in Amritsar to Gandhi and Nehru's satisfaction, Panikkar is then hoping for a kind of step up in a nascent political career. That doesn't seem to be happening, right? Because Nehru at this point is like, okay, you just be the spokesperson of the Congress. We don't have any other room for you at this point.
Right.
And there's this marvelous moment in the archives where you have these stream of letters from Panikkar to Nehru, from Nehru to Panikkar, sorry, going, what is the status? Are you going to join the Congress? Are you going to write the history of the Congress that we want you to write? Are you going to become the spokesperson of the Congress? There is no reply from Panikkar. So Panikkar essentially ghosts Nehru, to use very modern parlance, and just doesn't reply. Why does he not reply? Because he is essentially working behind the scenes to set up an English daily, which is supposed to essentially spread awareness about the Sikh political cause.
Yeah. It was supposed to be a mouthpiece for the Sikhs in some ways.
It was supposed to be that, except he, again, like I said, was a very ambitious man. He had no desire to be stuck in Amritsar.
Right.
He wanted it to be based in Delhi.
Okay, people, there's too much noise. Can you please keep quiet a little? Thank you.
Abhishek is a strict moderator. So essentially, he then comes to Delhi. He has managed to get about 25,000 rupees, which is how the Hindustan Times is born. He does not last long as the editor of the Hindustan Times. He lasts for less than a year. But during that time, he manages to make a very important presence felt.
Okay, right, okay. Great. Now, my next question, Narayani, is, as our first ambassador to China, Panikkar really influenced Nehru's views on communism. And then at some point they fell out, or let's say they began to fall out. They continue to remain personal friends all their lives. While reading your book, I got a sense that some of it was merely a confusion of the times. That's what I felt. But tell me, would you agree with it? How much of it was a confusion of the times, and how much of it was a genuine difference of temperament and understanding about their reading on China?
That's a big question to answer in the span of time that we have. But I would have to agree that a large part of it was many factors, in which confusion of the times plays a very important role, because we tend to forget that these were very confused times that we were living in. Political events were happening at the speed of light. So essentially, at this point, when Panikkar is sent to China to become our ambassador, another thing that we tend to forget is that India didn't have a trained foreign service. There were no such things as career diplomats in those days.
Right.
So Nehru essentially was dispatching men and women across the world who he trusted and whom he thought could contribute to New Delhi's brief about those countries. He sent Panikkar because by this point there's been a 2-decade-long association with Panikkar and his work and his mind. And he decides to send Panikkar as somebody who he feels can represent India's interests in China. What is important here is that Panikkar also shares Nehru's vision of this Asian solidarity, where India and China become partners almost in a growing world. This is sometimes mistaken for Panikkar as a communist.
Right.
There's an important distinction to be made there, and I think the archives tell that story. There are a couple more things here. One is that Panikkar is in China both during the remnants of nationalist China, so towards the end of the Civil War, which ends in 1949, and he then comes back to be the ambassador of the People's Republic of China.
Right.
It's during his term as ambassador in the People's Republic of China that he goes on to make several errors of judgment. One is that he gets distinctly swept away by the new communist leadership, right? Like, he's almost has a schoolboy crush on Mao. He thinks Mao is this new age Moses who's going to lead his people to a new land. And there's this remarkable point in his memoir about his time in China where he says that Zhou Enlai's fingers are like tender green onion shoots. So it's remarkable to read this. He's a sitting ambassador. This is how he's talking. So there's a definite sense of being swept away. There is also several grave strategic errors that he makes, which includes not speaking about the border or delineating it in any sense of the word in discussions with Chou Enlai. So yes, there are confusion of the times, definitely. Two, lack of career diplomats. Panikkar was not a career diplomat. We tend to also forget that there was also the Ministry of External Affairs involved here. There was also the United States involved here. This is a world that is embroiled in a Cold War. Right? So there are many factors that we tend to forget when we're looking at Panikkar's time in China. And so the weight of history becomes pinned on one man, which is a sort of not clear reading of what happened at that point. And I think that's something also that your biographies do really well, because you deal with Vajpayee with a lot of nuance and you deal with him with a lot of critical analysis and empathy. And this is also a world that was very confused. So how did you do that? How did you navigate how to tell the story of Vajpayee given that?
Well, for me, it works some in the head even before I started working on the book. How I approached writing the book was I tried deconstructing the books I loved. So because we're talking prime ministerial biographies, I really liked in the Catherine Frank book on Indira Gandhi that both of us love.
Yes.
I love the book by Philippe Short on François Mitterrand, the former French president. And oddly, I also, partly because Patrick was a bit of a mentor, I also loved his Naipaul biography. And all these books were roughly in the range of 500 to 600 pages. And so that was, I wanted to, that's the kind of book I was initially, for the longest time, aiming at. So, and all these books have that quality, you know, they are unjudgmental and at the same time unsentimental, not to say insensitive about their subjects. And in Catherine Frank's case, it was very similar to mine in the sense that she had access to interviews, but crucially, she did not have private papers because Indira Gandhi's private papers remained shut. And yet, reading her book, the way she framed it, it does not come. It is very rigorous and it never bores you. So that was one. And of course, I think I ended up spending a lot of time collecting material. I must have spent, 3 years, 4 years of full time, and then while reworking too, I spent a lot of time simply collecting the material. And I think the more material a writer has, you have more leverage over how you want to, frame your story. And so, yeah, I did that. And I think by the end, and after several reworks, and I gave it to 20 people, I think I managed to find a voice. And, in every page I could see that, okay, here is a voice that is neither, unduly critical, nor is it, excessively praise. Praise. All right. Also, tell me briefly about Panikkar's bilinguality. Like many other prominent 20th century lives, he was a very good bilingual. He was a bilingual both writer and a very prolific reader and a very prolific writer too, which is rather unusual for our age, but it was a lot less unusual for his age. JP, Gandhi, I think even Bose, all of them wrote in 2 languages, and they wrote very gracefully in both their mother tongues and English. And in Panikkar's case, the way you write, it seems as if his way of dealing with a stress or a crisis in professional life was that, okay, he would write some poetry in Malayalam, or sometimes he would write novels in Malayalam, which is, by the way, not an easy task to pull off a body of work of fiction. So can you very briefly tell us about Panikkar, the Malayali writer?
That's specifically one part that I had to deliberately leave out, because this book was just beginning to sprawl beyond anyone's sanity at that point. But Panikkar, you're right when you say that Panikkar wrote primarily to deal with stress. Every time he was facing trouble either at work or when he was facing a bit of trouble in his marriage, he would either write long poetry or he would write fiction, entire novels. He would translate Greek plays, so he was a translator as well. So he would do things like this when he was under immense stress. And there's a separate study to be done on K.M. Panikkar as an author and as a poet. It's just something that I've had to just leave out entirely. Okay. But that does bring me to Vajpayee, who was a beautiful writer and an orator as well. Those of us who've heard him speaking can attest to how wonderfully he spoke.
Right.
So tell us about Vajpayee, the
Yeah,
speaker and the writer.
Vajpayee's gift of language came partly from his ancestors. His grandfather was a Sanskrit scholar, and his father was a scholar of Sanskrit and Hindi and multiple other languages, even though he taught Hindi in Gwalior. And so from childhood, he was forced to be good at languages, even though he scored very badly in his Hindi exams also on some occasions. But otherwise, even as a child, he developed a sense of meter and rhyme and, tukbandi, wordplay. So in some ways, it came to him very naturally. And he would accompany his father to Kavi Sammelans, and that's how he would sometimes be made to speak at Kavi Sammelans. So, he fumbled a few times, but he gradually got better and better at it. But Vajpayee, I have mentioned in the book, what most people don't know is that Vajpayee used to prepare his speeches really well. Even if he cracked a joke, he would know where exactly in his speech to place that joke, so there would be maximum response. And if he went to a venue and if he saw that crowd was not responding in a certain way, he would change his speech. So he learned all of that. But some of it was also exposure. As a writer of prose, in 47 after his masters, he got a job in Lucknow as of launching RSS mouthpieces, and he worked with Rashdharm and Panchjanya and Swades, and later he was moved to Delhi and he briefly edited Rashdharm for 5 years, and then he was, of course, around the time Sama Prasad Mukherjee died, he was, they got him in Janasangh, and then after that he became more of for much of his life, he became more of a speaker. So that is his background. But I would still say Vajpayee, the writer or the poet, is 10% of his character. 90% of him was a political beast for sure. So yeah, that is for sure. Because on dozens of occasions, he threatened to quit politics, but he never did. He quit politics when he had a major stroke in 2007, and by then he couldn't write poetry either. So yeah, he wanted to tell the world that he was one half poet, but I think the proportion is he was primarily a political beast, who also occasionally wrote poetry, sometimes good, sometimes not so good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, talking about, because I talked about core identity, Vajpayee's identity. Tell me, what was Panikkar's core identity? You mentioned that he was scholar, teacher, poet, writer, constitutional expert, editor, diplomat, bureaucrat. But one could also think of Panikkar as a map maker, because SRC recommendations were implemented. Because when we think of map making, we only think of Jinnah and Nehru and Patel.
Absolutely.
And we don't think of people who played a role in crafting the boundaries between states. So he was in a sense a map maker too. But what I want to know is, did he have a core identity out of all these roles, at least in his head? And what do you think as a biographer?
I think I hate speaking for my subjects, but from everything that I have read about Panikkar and researched about Panikkar, I think definitely he would identify as a scholar. That's one thing that he begins doing at the age of 17. He continues doing it all through his life, is to continue thinking about what India is, what it means to be Indian. In colonial India, he's thinking about what is the difference between being a subject of empire and a citizen of one's own country. He's thinking about migration. He's thinking about diaspora and its rights. He's constantly thinking, and you see it reflected throughout his career, whether it's in journalism, whether it's as a history professor, whether it's as the architect of our independent maritime policy. Everywhere you see Panikkar, he is constantly projecting what a modern version of India should look like, and how that should keep adapting itself to a world that keeps changing minute by minute. So I'd go with scholar, honestly.
Oh wow! Okay, great. Okay, my next question is what I have always in my head called the Vinod Mehta rule, which is that any memoir or biography, if it wants to be taken seriously, must seriously confront subject's major flaws. You call out Panikkar's hypocrisy on the issue of gender, his idea of the art of housekeeping and so on. You also write about one of his affairs with a French woman. Tell us a little more about that side of Private Panikkar.
Well, Private Panikkar was, apart from being a writer and apart from being a very successful teller of stories, etc., was somebody who had an eye for the ladies. That is fair assessment, I'd say. He, in his early writings, there is a lot of hypocrisy, and this is before, of course, he's gone on to have 4 daughters, which he eventually did. So in his early days, there is a lot of chauvinism in his writings about women. He'll make comments like, women should be educated and should have rights, but only so far as it doesn't disturb family life. Right? However, you see a sort of shift towards his daughters later. He treats them very, very much as independent intellectual equals. You have his eldest daughter helping him with translations. You have his youngest daughter being trained as he was trained in the classics, and he teaches her how to speak Sanskrit. It's a very intellectual meeting of the minds. His youngest daughter, Devaki, eventually fell in love with, popular communist leader, M.N. Nair. And this was when Panikkar was in the thick of controversy in China as ambassador. And he was being called a communist. He was being castigated as a communist. He was being watched by the CIA. You would have thought that he would freak out to find out that his daughter was in love with a communist. He did not, however. He said, okay, look, your ideals and ideologies are your own. In fact, she comes to China and she spends some time with him and his wife in China. And she is reporting on the activities of the Congress Party, of the Communist Party in China. And all of that is pretty remarkable. However, his marital life, he does have a very prominent affair in the 1920s when he's a young man and he is traveling across Europe. And also in England to train for his law degree. He meets this French lawyer. She's a remarkable woman. That's the thing about Panikkar. He liked women with strong intellect. And she was very feisty. She was very, very, very fiercely feminist. She was very brilliant, leading the bar in her day. There is a sense that they had an affair, which I've talked about in the book. And at some point, and this is where my previous point about families comes in, because there are doors that remain closed for very private reasons. So there are rumors then that there was a strain in the marriage when he comes back. There's a silence around that as well, but the strain is evident. It comes out in many incidents that I've quoted in the book. But all of that goes to show a man who was a living, breathing human being and capable of fallibilities,
and who evolved over
the years. And I think your biography of Vajpayee does the same, because you also deal with Vajpayee's very complex private life as well.
Yeah, I mean, look. I always knew I was going to write about Vajpayee's private life. And I think, and I have been asked this question enough number of times. The thing is also, if I were also to frame it in an opposite manner, I could not have not written about his private life. Partly because when he was the Prime Minister, his daughter and his son-in-law virtually ran the PMO. And so to not write about that, it would have been stupid. I mean, even dishonest. I mean, I would not, and of course, quite apart from the fact that Vajpayee was also a very loving family man. He was a great father, he was a great grandfather.
As was Panikkar, absolutely.
All of that. But my central problem in my case was, if his daughter was so much at the heart of everything Vajpayee did, I had to find the evidence of whether or not she was a biological daughter. I had the hunch even before I started, because their faces resemble so much. But I mean, I would go to people and they were like, हाँ उसकी बेटी लगती तो है, but कुलदीप नायर said कि मैंने DNA testing तो नहीं कराया, लेकिन हम लोग बोलते थे कि उसकी बेटी है, so on. But I think at some point, I mean, Kuldeep Nair passed away. I mean, may his soul, if such a thing exists, rest in peace. But then, for a long time, and because I also went to Ramjas, I asked people, and the PR was so strong that no one would give me clear answers. And I think it was only after I kept going to some of these people again and again and again and again, I don't know what happened, something flipped. At some point, on one day, one person started crying and said, yeah, this was such a major issue.
Right.
at that point.
Yeah.
And it basically that it was like the jigsaw puzzle. I mean, I always had the hunch that there was something to it.
Yeah, but the
And
pieces sort
it
of
spilled
fell
out.
into
And
place.
thereafter,
Yeah.
surprisingly, I went to others, and gradually, one by one, everyone said. But everyone said, "ये सब लिखना मत." ठीक है. And in some cases, they said कि लिखना है तो लिख देना, but you are not taking my name, else I'll disown you.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So that's how I happened to. And I think private life was at the heart of his existence. Had it not been for a robust private life, Vajpayee would have been forced to retire in the 80s. Yeah, I mean, he could sustain his years out of power and in obscurity because he has a very stable emotional, system at home. He has a very loving family, loving friends, who kept him sane all those years. Yeah. So had he been an RSS pracharak, he would have gone mad. Anyways, do we? Okay. Okay. One last question I wanted to ask you is that you give a lot of space and agency to Panikkar's wife, but do you, by any chance, have a dream woman subject because you've not written about a woman yet?
No, I mean, I have not written about women yet.
I mean a proper book.
It's, it's something that I do recognize. I desperately do want to write about a woman. I'm still looking for a subject, but you know how it is. I mean, you don't immediately come across a subject without, several amounts of digging through various other rabbit holes. So I don't. There are many fantastic women in the history of this country that should be written about. I haven't zeroed in on one as yet.
Okay.
You?
Okay. I mean, I am slightly bored of big loose baggy monster biographies, so not anytime soon. But if anyone in the crowd is interested, they can do a great book on, I think, Amrita Pritam. She is one person on which one can write a slightly Sylvia Plath
this is not about crowd, na? This is about you.
and no, anyone. I mean, anyone, anywhere. And quite a few. I think Sucheta Kriplani and J.B. Kriplani, they're a fascinating political couple about whom no one has written. I very desperately want to read a good book on it. And there's so many. I mean, it's really a virgin territory.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to read a book on Asa Bhosle for that matter. Anything. Yeah. But the thing is, let's say a book on Mangeshkar, on Lata or Asha, has to be a little more the kind of book I would like. It will have to be slightly rigorous for me to like. I mean, I know there already exist quickies and hagiographies, but a slightly more grounded one that also talks about their other things, like, about their Savarkarite background, their Marathi subnationalism, and so on, and the larger background. Yeah. And of course, their music career and private life and so on. So it's not very easy to write, but yeah, I mean, if someday someone wants to write about the Mangeshkar sisters, I think it will be a great subject. I mean, Swati Chopra is sitting there. Maybe she'll commission someone. Okay. All right. We have 5 minutes. We can take questions from the audience. Anyone has a question? Yes, gentlemen. Yeah.
Ma'am, consisting of your VP Menon, the modern, the unsung architect of the modern India, after reading the 454 pages, After reading the 454 pages, I inscribed that you haven't mentioned that you are her grandchild and he is your great grandfather. Ma'am, do you hesitate of the relationship you share with a real freedom fighter?
No, there's absolutely no hesitation. Why I didn't actually mention it is it's his biography. If I was writing my recollections, if I had any, then of course I'd mention it. But I've publicly always acknowledged that he is my great-grandfather. It's a matter of great pride.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, gentleman in the second row, yeah.
Yeah, can you shed some light on the views of Panikkar on the partition and his work on integration of princely states after the Menon takeover?
That's a great question. B, also a very long answer, so I'll try to keep it very short.
Quick answer,
yeah. So I'll keep it short. Panikkar, like most Indian state leaders who at the time were working on the transfer power, was not in favor of partition at all. He writes about it in a very disillusioned manner. In the early 1940s, I think he is one of the first to acknowledge that this may be a reality, but he's very bitter about it. It's not something that anyone wanted, Panikkar included. As far as the integration of the princely states are concerned, he actually begins, and it's very interesting having done a biography of VP Menon, because both VP Menon and Panikkar sort of bookend that process. Panikkar is involved with the integration of the princely states and an attempt to bring them on board a modern union of India as early as the 1930s. And he does it in a very constitutional way because he's pushing for federalism. Right? VP Menon comes in at a much later stage and sort of delivers the final blow, so to speak. But Panikkar is involved with it in a very legal way, in a very constitutional way. But that's a very long answer. Please buy my book and read it.
Yeah, read the book, please. Okay, someone at the back. Someone raise the... Yes, yes. Gentleman in the hoodie. Yeah. And only questions, no comments. Yeah.
All right,
Thank
all
you.
right. My question is, what are the sources one encounters when researching Vajpayee, and how do they differ from sources for Nehru, who has been written and researched for a far longer time and has a collection put together by archivists, librarians, etc. as well?
Oh, Nehru's private papers are available at the Teen Murti library. So if you're interested, you can actually go and access them. The private letters and certain family letters have, been kept aside by the family. So you won't find Edwina Nehru letters, but everything else is there and it's very good. If you're interested in these things, you should go take a look at the Nehru papers at Teen Murti. I became a fan of Nehru after I read those papers. There does not exist any private papers on Vajpayee, so you basically I had to tramp my way here and there all across the world to gather stuff. But I genuinely hope that someday the family will donate something. But it's also not just a BJP problem. I mean, we were just discussing, we do not have Mrs. Gandhi's private papers. We do not have Rajiv Gandhi's private papers. So this is an institutional problem. In India, after 70s, I think we do not even have like the basic IB archives, which any third-rate democracy anywhere on earth maintains. So it's like that. You have to tramp. The closer you come to present, the more tramping will be involved. So yeah, that's my answer. Anyone else? Okay, lady at the back. Yes, please pass on the mic to her. Yes, ma'am.
This is more about the process of writing a biography. At what point do you think you have sufficient evidence to, write a biography about the person or the subject that you're keeping in mind?
Do you want to give a quick answer?
I think the quickest answer that I can give is somewhere in your head you have to tell yourself to stop, because otherwise there is no stopping. There's always a new story to sort of uncover, a new angle to uncover at some point. And it's very hard to explain, but when you have a big collection of archival evidence, of interviews, depending on who your subject is, of actual paperwork, of memories of the time that were lived in, enough to sort of construct a portrait in your own head of the kind of times that these were and the kind of person that this was. Because uncovering each part will lead you to fresh questions. So at some point, you bring to your mind the fact that, okay, this is where I stop. The rest has to be for readers to write, because there is no such thing as a definitive book. There is no such thing as a comprehensive book. There is always more to add, which is the beauty of writing books like these.
Okay, I would say develop what Hemingway used to call a bullshit detector meter as a reader. Try and read voraciously. And when you actually are in the middle of writing, just in my experience, I would stop if I would not stop until I have 80 to 85%. But something in your head will tell you that, okay, now this is a point where I can start. Okay, so that's my answer. And I think we are out of time. Anyways, thank you for coming here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.